GameMarx.
On this episode of GameMarx, the crew is back to recap our trip to the East Coast Game Conference, make jokes at the expense of Cliffy B, and discuss hipster cuisine. Ubisoft fired Patrice a second time. Hey Patrice, send us a resume, and we'll take a look. Hey everyone, welcome back to the GameMarx podcast. First of all, apologies, it's been about a month since we released an episode. That is due to two reasons, one of which is fuck Nintendo, and I should have a whole lot more detail. I'm going to try to get a blog post out this weekend. Around the time this goes up on the site, there'll be a blog post on that just detailing, although news is breaking all over now of how Nintendo's been screwing with Let's Plays on YouTube, so we kind of got hit by that, and the way Google handles that is while I was appealing that, which we eventually won our appeal and everything, Google punishes us by not letting us upload long videos anymore, just for filing our appeal. So I'll have the details on that in the blog post, get to that. The other reason is also I'm going through a lot of medical stuff and just, post-treatment type stuff, so that's taking up a lot of time, and I don't have a lot of free time in the interim. So, the podcast is going to come out sporadic for the next month or two, until things stable back down, and it won't be all of us again. This is not a change of format. This is a special episode that we're doing here because all three of us, we went to the East Coast Game Conference, in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is, Epic's backyard. So, keynote by Cliff Bleszinski and, who's the other guy? Jason Vanderhees?
I think it was like James Vanderberg.
Should know this. We don't have.
I don't
maybe.
know.
We don't have we don't have the literature from the conference. So,
I took notes on the panels.
There was hardly none. Let's just get into the execution of the conference. So it was what, $85? I think it was $80. So I mean, it wasn't not for a 2-day conference.
Not bad.
Not bad. Not a good, reasonable price to go to it. So I don't want to beat them up too much. But, really all that got us was a badge. There was not handed out guides, there wasn't even a mobile app for session attendees. It felt like overall the conference really exists to be a job fair, for recent graduates.
And that may be because of where it's located.
Where it's located, there's a couple college programs or such that deal in game design. And then also with Epic being headquartered out there in the Unreal Engine, there's a direct need out in there. But, Cliff Bleszinski talked a little bit in his keynote. They're wanting to highlight the triangle more, as in the game development industry, and that's part of the process. If you're out that way, I do recommend going to the conference. Overall, I mean, I had a great time. We'll definitely go back if they have it next year. With the change of ownership happening at Epic, I could see that this may or may not happen. They're
one of the
a major sponsor of the conference and everything like that. But, so, walking around the show floor that they had set up, it's really a bunch of booths to, hand in a resume. And if you weren't interested in doing that, there was, nothing for us.
Nope.
Yeah.
You get some time on a Wacom Clinique tablet.
The Wacom
Cintiq,
yeah, that's what it is.
Clinique's makeup or something.
What was that?
That's Thunder.
That was Thunder? Okay. Or mostly battery operated, I think. I don't know. Just to get some time on that, they're at the booth, walking around, checking it out.
I got to touch one. I never thought I'd be able to touch one, so this was a win for me.
I walked around with an arrogant attitude of because obviously I'm not going to apply to work at a game development studio.
Yeah.
It's too far gone. That ship has sailed. But all these kids it really felt like they were lambs to the slaughter of and you think you're going to have this wonderful game career and they're going to cram you in some cubicle somewhere on a Death March project and you're going to be doing the most unflattering dev that, is just the shit work of a AAA title.
You're going to model a doorknob and doorknob's not even going to get in there.
Yeah, you're going to get laid off after it. Before the game's even out, maybe, you get cut because that's the way development goes. And it's like, you know what? I'm not going to be on those studios. I'm not going to be working that game. I'm probably already making more money than you'll ever make in your careers.
Yeah, as business developers, I suspect it's probably it's probably the same experience a lot of developers get when they first get in and start making contacts with recruiters. Like, there's some really good recruiters, and then there are some that will just
tell you exactly what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And the thing is look around you, man. Like, 50 people are in this line. Epic gets to dictate the terms here.
Yeah, definitely.
They don't have to be great at the starting kids. And Epic may be good in terms of the game industry. But, like, if you look at the game industry compared to, like, the business industry, it's like, no, this is crap, man. This is crap for what you can do, programming a computer. So, yeah, I kind of walked around with the smoke superiority, made some comments at the windows.
If you had not, I probably would have, so, that's the only...
The comments were made. Hearts were broken.
The one thing I noticed, and I mentioned to you, Dylan, the ratio of males to females, I won't say it was like 50-50. There was, let's say, like, it was a third of the conference was female. There was a lot of women.
And I wasn't the only dark person there.
No, there was a dude, a male, right, that was wearing drop-down earrings. Like, so there was a black man dressed effeminately, walking around in the open. I'm like, wow, we've hit diversity. We've hit levels of diversity Georgia hasn't seen,
Certain sections of Georgia has never seen and probably won't for the next 30 years.
So for Mother's Day, like I got you the dragon earrings, that was where that idea came from, because that's kind of what he was wearing, and then I was getting ready to go up, and he had dreads, right? And they were all tied
the dreadlock
back.
dude.
Yeah. He didn't have the earrings on, like, every day, but he did have them down, and he had two dangling down. So I thought it was a she, because I was sitting behind him, and I was going to say, excuse me, where did you get those earrings? Because my wife would love them, and, I'd like to get those for Mother's Day or something like that. And then they got up, then there was like that moment of like, wait a minute, that's, like, your brain is like, something is different here, and I'm trying to process, and then as he walked by and walked out, then it's like, wait a minute, that's not a female, that's a male,
This question might not go over well.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, I could have still asked the question, but at that point,
you have to be careful about how you phrase it.
I didn't have to hunt him down, and that felt stalkerish or weird at that point. So, yeah, I didn't, but yeah, so I felt like, props to Raleigh and the conference, like, for all the flack lately of gender bias and all this in video games and the industry. Not at this conference. In speakers and in attendees, it seemed pretty damn diverse for any technical conference.
And a lot of different ages, too.
Ages were all over the place. Now, the one thing it was not diverse in was indie versus AAA. Almost everybody there was either going into or was already in AAA development. And everybody was, like, talking about their contract with EA, then they published for, Ubisoft, and they worked for this and all that. So, like, all these people were already at that level. There wasn't much of a startup indie talk type stuff. Yeah. And even the talks that I went to that looked like they were that were all about, like, how you work with the contracts with the AAA publishers and all that. Yeah. So it didn't have a good indie.
Well, not like we and coming from XNA would regard indie as you're kind of like
a Jonathan Blow or that game company Journey level, like the mid-tier indies, the notch indies. Like I didn't even get that vibe that any of that existed.
Even at the talk with Keith Shepard, they were all talking about, so how did you word your resume so that when you got in the business that you could go to one of those big studios?
Yeah.
It was just like, you're missing the point, people.
Yeah. And that was the thing I was thinking too with all these kids of like, no, you don't understand. Like if you ever think you're going to design an Assassin's Creed, you're going to have to go indie, form your own studio, and prove yourself out there, because they don't promote these guys from within. They buy up other studios and then put those people as creative directors across the projects. they don't bring up. Nobody rises from within. You never hear about that. You only just hear about acquiring and then, you know, like, oh, they launched these titles, so now we'll have them launch these titles. There just aren't simply enough titles coming out of the AAA game studio factories to really support both, like, taking the current lead game designers and putting them on projects, and then also bringing up new young people and putting them on projects. It would take
so many people involved to create a game that large that, I mean, obviously not everyone involved can become a designer, can move up the ranks.
All right, so we're going to go from notes. I think this is going from memory.
Mostly.
But we'll run down the sessions that we attended and our comment on those sessions. So correct me if, like, it got switched around, because I think a few of these we had wrong in our schedule. Or changed or something, so they may not be in here. But I have you up first, Dylan, as going to tabletop design principles.
Yes. And that was actually not a video game related panel. It was run by
tabletop video games.
Well, I mean, it was.
I thought it was about Miss Pac-Man and Pizza Huts, but go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I guess from the name, for some reason I was thinking like role playing, because it was mostly about role playing. It was given by Jason Morningstar, who did Fiasco. I've never played any of his games, but Fiasco was on tabletop at one point. And he basically talked about concepts like, you know, what is your game about? Not just the theme or not just the situation or the setting, but actually the concepts that you're playing with, how you structure your rules so that, you know, for example, in Dungeons and Dragons, there's no heroism stat. That's something the rules never really touch, but it plays a big part of the game. And in some of the other concepts of, like, kind of the social contract of, you know, the rules and the system basically define what players can do. And once you start understanding that, you can play with those concepts in your games. And he mentioned, like, I actually created a list of games he mentioned just as examples to check out at some point. I don't do a lot of role-playing much anymore. I think I'd have a hard time finding people to play, like, mechanics light systems that are more about role-playing with. But anyway, he talked about, like, you know, you start playing with those rules, and then you can create GM full and GM less systems, you know, where everyone's GM or the roles switch. You can look at the bleed of emotions between players and characters. Just all these little things you can tweak and play around with in the game. It was really interesting, and he did, like, towards the end, kind of bring it back around to how it might be used in games, in video games, because he mentioned, like, I think there were some questions about MMOs. He mentions The Walking Dead as an example of how a lot of these get, especially, like, the emotional bleed. Because he talks about, you know, it's basically dirty emotional tricks. I don't know, it's an interesting panel, although it's like a couple levels above what I think about game design, especially since now most of my tabletop gaming is board gaming.
All right. So the next session I have on the list, we all went to these sessions at the same time. This is the first session.
Yeah.
Was me going to create and program and control complex third-person character animation, and this was in Unity. So this was using Unity in the session. So, all right, for some background, Let Them Dare just came and passed, which was right after this conference, and I entered and competed in that, and the judging is not done on that, but I don't care about the judging. It was not about that. It was about finishing the game. And so if you go into Let Them Dare and you search for Vinyl Quest, the name of the game I did was Quest. But you search for Vinyl on there, you'll find my game that I put in. Which I did it all in Unity, and you know, basically crammed the week before ECGC doing Unity. So I had some understanding of Unity when I went in, and you know, kind of one of my goals going here was to hit a lot of Unity sessions, and kind of now that I have a base understanding of Unity and how it works to kind of see some sessions presented onto it, so I can kind of get a feel for how people are using it and what other systems are there and where should I choose to focus effort on. And I will say this, I've become a fan of Unity. I've become a Unity convert. I think going forward, I'm going to do all my development in Unity. I think we've had this conversation going forward too. Unity is going to be the platform, and I just hope that the next Xbox supports Unity. Because if it does, I'll support it. If it's not, sorry, it hits too many other platforms, and I'm really liking it, and I'm really kind of kicking myself for putting off too long getting into it. Because once you give over to Unity's structure, you realize you can be a lot faster in it, right?
Yeah.
Although I do miss having the raw code as a programmer, but learning it can be a lot faster. So what this session was really about is they call it the mechanism. They took the word mech, M-E-C-H, and animation. They kind of made some weird mechanisming, something. I don't know how you're supposed to say it. But anyway,
Mechanimation?
No, because it's not that long. But it's a new feature in 4.0. And at the crux, what Unity has done is they have separated animations from the models. So animations exist as a separate thing from the model. So you have a model that has a bone structure set to it, and that's it. You don't have animations in the model anymore. And then you have another set of animations that could have been imported from 3D Studio Max or Blender or whatever. But all you'd have to do there is just have the skeleton and then set up the animations. You wouldn't have to have an entire model to go with it. Although it could help in some of the editing and debugging. So you bring in that model, and then you bring in your animations, and then you can apply the animations to multiple models. Now, if the model is humanoid, meaning it's bipedal, 2 arms, got a torso, waist, head, Unity will do a lot of magic now. And it can actually map any humanoid animation to any humanoid model, and it'll just kind of figure it out. That's probably the foot because of where it's positioned and what it's named. It'll use a whole bunch of heuristics and give you a best fit. And, the session showed a lot of demo data where Unity has made available for free in some of their asset store stuff an entire collection of mocap data. So you get 30 jumps and 50 runs, and I don't know if it's that much, but it was a ton of mocap data. And you find the animation you want, and then you map it on the model. And then you can go into the mapping section and tell it that, well, okay, so this was written for a guy like me, a very skinny guy. He was running and doing flips and things like that. And we're mapping it to this guy in Space Marine armor, right? And now he doesn't look right because he's moving way too quick and, he's jumping and flipping and doing things like that. So what we do is we go into the mapping and then we adjust the mapping of the bones to say that, no, his stance is much wider. And the weight of his body is much heavier, and we slow this arm down, and then we put a restriction of movement because he's in armor. He can't move his arm all the way up. He can only move his arm this high. So you go into that model and you set the restrictions now on the mapping, and then Unity just redoes the animation to fit. And then it even can go beyond this in that you can take 2 animations, such as, this is what I wrote that whole fucking book about. Taking 2 animations and blending them together seamlessly. So say you're running and then you jump, okay? So you have the run animation, you have the jump animation, right? And then the character runs and he jumps. And then when he lands back from the jump animation ends on the left foot, but the run starts on the right foot. And then you have this weird, slide step thing that happens in there. They pulled up this mode where they just showed both animations that were applied to the same character. And then you could see the one animation and the left animation, or the first animation followed by the second animation, and they showed where they butt up, they end to each other, This is the running state, and then he transitions to the jump state, or from the jump state to the run state. And then they just took these on the timeline, and the timeline, you could see a waveform of left foot down versus right foot down, okay? Again, this works with bipedal, humanoid forms only. They just slid them together until the feet lined up to basically give Unity a hint of no, here's where you need to do the blending. And then it works seamlessly. Then the guy was running and jumping and landing constantly on the right foot. All of this some beautiful mocap data. They instanced like 300 models on his little MacBook Pro while running Unity with no lag. All of these models running around doing a hardcore parkour stuff. They showed the ability to give like the character a weapon and attach points to the weapon, and then let the animation system know, like, no, he's holding a bazooka. So when he runs, he can't run his hands anymore. They're attached here. These are fixed points. So he can bob a little, but he can't, like, swing his arms. And it was doing all this shit by magic. There was also an entire state-based system for animation. So it's basically like, when the player is in the run state, they can go to the walk state or the jump state, When they're in the jump state, they can go back to the run state, but they can't go to the walk state, Like, so you could set up all these decision trees for how the different animations could play and react. You could map them to controls, so you could give the states definition by code, of course, but also just by systems in there, one of which was, like a thumbstick control and giving radial access. So, like, within 0 to 0.5 is the walk animation, 0.5 to 1 of any direction of the thumbstick is the run animation. And then you could actually set animations based on the XY coordinates so that when you pulled back, the animation was running backwards instead of like a full run but moving backwards, or a full run. So you could have a strafe animation, 2 strafing animations, a slow and a fast. Now, if you don't have a humanoid, I asked this question in the session. If you don't have a humanoid model, it will still allow you to apply one animation. Let's say you had like mechs, or you had spiders. You had 8-legged spiders. You have 5 or 6 spiders in the game, though. They're all going to use the same base animation set. Or you want to at least use that and then maybe customize 1 or 2. As long as all the skeletons were identical, bones named the same thing, placed in the same order, right? So you import the same base skeleton to all models, then you could freely move them between it. Now, you wouldn't get some of the other features, I think, but you could still use the system, share the animations, use the state-based system, and of course you could use a lot of that on a single model that also contained all of its animations, so you could use it in the traditional sense as well. And all that is their new system. If you want to just load up the animations in your model and access those, you need to go in and tell Unity, on this model, use traditional-based animation, and then it will show you all the animation and stuff. Because by default, you won't see that on a model anymore. Because you would have to say, like, no, this is the animation data I want you to import from this model file. I think that pretty much covers that session. I mean, seeing the asset store and being able to just download animation packs, like, really got me jazzed for, like, maybe we can do 3D.
Did they have anything in there where you could Frankenstein a couple of the animations?
Yes. So you could take the mocap data and blend a couple in there.
I mean, for, like, you have a semi-humanoid, like a centaur.
Well, no. So if your model is not an exact humanoid shape, if you have 4 legs, no, you're out. Okay, it's only going to work on humanoid, bipedal, right now. Like, I don't know if they'll do more in the future, but it does kind of seem kind of the thing of like, really, what are you going to do? Because everything under the sun, like, at that point, how useful is centaurs outside of, like, one game?
I don't know, centaurs, driders, harpies. There's a bunch of stuff that I'd like to Frankenstein together.
So, the other thing that you could do is also use your curves, your easing algorithms and things like that for controlling the speed of the animations. So, like, you could say, like, no, when he goes to the run animation, he's got to work into it at this rate, but when he comes out, he can come out very quick. So you could do that as well. So, let's see, who's I got up next? Next is Cicely in the writing The 1001 Faces?
Yes. I forget exactly what her name was, but she did a lot of talk on NPCs mostly,
and how you find your inspiration for the people who, in the end, won't really matter to the player because it's not them and it's not the person that was going to be in the front of the box. But hey, maybe they gave you a quest or two. And how to keep that a little bit more world accurate. Like, say you have an Amazonian world, then yeah, you probably want 90% of your characters to be female. But say you live in a world kind of like this one, you probably want to have a few more females than males, but it's probably going to be about 50-50. And so start with a list of names, male and female, and then start at like 50 names long on both sides of just specific age, and it's just like, okay, this works, this works, this works, this works, this works, this works. And like, what do I need? A baker. Let's make it a Jane. I need a poopsmith. Bradley sounds nice. And then you go out and, like, how do you find inspiration for what they're going to be? It's like, just real life. So she talked about where she went on through obituaries and stuff to get some life stories for, like, the booklets and whatnot for the world that you're going to build. And even if nobody but you and the writers of the story sees the world booklet, the story Bible, I think she called it, it should be there. Like, maybe Ned is important in this world, but not to your story. But you still need to know that. And then, because it was the writing track, they had this is our first writing track ever before everything. And just like, okay, cute. Don't do this again.
Well, I know when one of the audio systems I went at, they were pissed because I think the writing track replaced the audio track.
Oh.
Yeah, so they were like, this is the only audio session. There's no audio track at this conference. But okay. So, let's see. Next session. So that was the morning. Then the second session we went to, I'm on the list first here with Art of Monopoly Hotels. Yes. So Monopoly Hotels is a Tiny Towers game. Funny that they never acknowledged it was a Tiny Towers game with the Monopoly fiction in
You can't really do that.
I think if you're in a game talking about the design and how you approached it, but
plausible
in
deniability.
Defense, it was an art track, and it was like how they adapted the art. I don't know if there was a lot of takeaway, other than like, okay, we were making an iPhone game, and we were making a 2D game. So the Monopoly character is a 3D rendered guy, and we went with this 2D stylized art thing. And then because we went with the 2D stylized art, then we had to simplify a lot of what the things look like in Monopoly, the board game, and then the Monopoly, the other properties, because they're all 3D assets that are rendered out for all that stuff is what they're using. I was shocked when you said the team had no 2D programming or art experience on the team. That was new for them. Because I'm like, how the fuck are you in a AAA studio and nobody in your entire studio has 2D experience? Like, that's new to you. Right? Nobody fucking drew a fruit bowl at some point? Like, how?
Well, I think, like,
maybe they're under the age of 20.
I think as we discussed, because I remember we talked about this after that session, that's got to be like, they did those art classes, but no one has experience doing textures specific to games. Because obviously doing a still life and doing game sprites are different
textures
things.
And 3D models, but not...
Yeah, and that is a
2D art
third thing entirely. But I'm sure, just because you can do art doesn't mean you can do 2D art for
It highlighted
games.
the disconnect we talked about at the beginning of the show, of that these were all AAA industry stuff, and that's where this can kind of happen. But you would never have like an indie team that go like, yep, nobody on the team has ever worked in 2D. It's like, no, all of us are working in 2D. We're trying to work in 3D now.
It's probably, that's where you start.
One thing that came out that was kind of insightful was that in their mobile game, how important it is if you release a mobile game to be successful that you have a constant update of new content going in. I mean, they were literally every week adding something to the game, and that the game was designed at the beginning, because as soon as you stop doing that is when you start to fall down the charts. You become less and less interesting. So even if you get people to play the game for a while, to keep them coming back and to keep your market segment growing, you're going to need
to find out where the new dragon is and how to breed it.
Well, but what's interesting...
It's a free-to-play type game with a monetization system, with different currencies in the game that they want you to buy. They're tiny towers, and basically what they're doing is they're selling you the different room types that you could put inside of your Monopoly hotels.
It's another one of these casual social games where people pay for aesthetics, or people keep playing for the aesthetics, not necessarily for game effect, was at least what it sounded like to me when you described it.
I think the last funny thing that happened in this one that's worth note is the guy giving the presentation made a comment that looked like total deadpan delivery too. That he said, and we were so successful. He got it, so he was in on the joke. It was an ironic deadpan.
Yeah.
We were so successful that our mobile game, based on the Hasbro board game, now has a board game coming out based on the mobile game that we made based on the board game.
And the snake eats itself, and the circle of life continues.
Yeah. So, alright, now both of you went to the same session, this next one?
I think.
You both went to making multi-platform games with Unity? Yes, because I know I strongly encourage you guys to kind of get hopefully be an overview, and I think I ducked into the end of this one too.
You did. I saw you come in.
I think maybe half of the stuff they covered in this, I'd kind of already gone through tutorials on Unity that covered, so it was actually nice going in to see that, because they literally, it was one of the Unity evangelists.
Yeah.
He literally built a working game in an hour.
Yes. It didn't
Using
work.
a lot of pre-made assets.
Caveat, yes, a lot of which, especially as a developer, was frustrating, because it's like, oh, here's a nice script that does this, just by magic.
Mm-hmm.
It's the type of thing, then, you're in your hotel that night, you open up your laptop, and you open up Unity, and then you want...
But it let me know that even he's just like, you know what? I don't have the time, patience, or creativity for half of the shit that somebody else can do better.
Oh, yeah, it's...
So, my takeaways in that thing, because I came in at the point where he was talking about baking your static lighting and your light maps.
Yeah.
But it was that...
A lot of baking.
There was a lot of baking going on, yes. A lot of things can be baked. Well, that's a performance thing. That's nothing new. But the main things that I wrote down at this point was that you can do model switching. So texture switching is common, where you use low-res versions and high-res when you get up close. And you can do maximum texture resolution per platform. So iOS would have a higher texture resolution because of Retina displays than your Android phones. Because it would be wasted on an Android phone. But you could also do model switching. So you could have a low polygon count version of the model and a high polygon count version of the model, and you could switch the models based on rendering distance, but also based on platform. So you could have iOS detailed 3D models, and then you could have high advanced PC detailed, and you don't need separate projects for these. It'll just, at build time, pick the platform and do the model. So that was a big takeaway I got. And then it was kind of cool to see the navigational maps that they were setting up.
Yeah, and I was kind of joking about the, going through everything really quickly, but it at least lets you know what everything is. And he went into a couple of other things, like occlusion culling, using light probes when you bake the lighting to kind of simulate dynamic lighting, and some other things. He actually did get into some code about switching out your mobile or your touch and your keyboard versions of certain things.
Which one get permissions?
Yeah, it
was pretty good.
It was good that he gave you an overview of Unity if you weren't familiar, and then if you were dug into what you need to look at when doing a mobile game. Sorry, I feel like do you have any...
No, I didn't get too lost during the entire thing, and that's wonderful.
Well, I wanted you to go to it just to kind of see what Unity is, because if we go forward with it, like, you'll be working in it too. I mean, it's kind of a unifying tool. It's not like Visual Studio is for the programmers, and then the modeling tool is for the artists. Like, Unity is for all the people on the team. And just kind of you do your components, you know, and you break that up. Okay, so this next one, I have both you and me, but I don't think you went to this session, Dylan. I think you went to something else. So
no, I think
both in audio programming, and you did not go to
one of the tracks shifted up. I want to say the programming track shifted up, and I went to something different. So
what did you go to?
Combat systems. I can't remember what the full name was. It was like creating a combat system in a short development cycle.
Okay. Anything from that to take away?
It was kind of a lessons learned from it was Ben 10 Omniverse. The guy who worked on that, or one of the guys who worked on that.
Is that a PC, mobile, or console title?
I think it's console. I think it may just be Xbox 360. I don't know what else it's on. But he basically broke down how you would build like a beat 'em up combat system. Things like combo trees, hit reactions, damage and vulnerability tables, things like that, and went through how you would time attacks. It was really very fine-grained detail. I do not envision ever making a game that is this specific, this action-oriented, but it was actually very neat to see the logic that goes into that, plotting out the keyframes of when you can attack, when you can interrupt, when you deal damage, things like that. It was actually really neat to see someone talking about a product that was out there, a big name product, actually. Something recognizable. So
Cicely, you were in Writing for Your Audience, Narrative Design and Best Practices from Freemium to Hardcore.
Yeah, I remember not really liking this one. I liked it because it was talking about how to write, but it was more of the same on the writing, do your homework, and he made a bunch of really small games at first, and then they upped the game slowly, because he talked about when he first got out of school, looking down on the games that you used to play on your cell phones when they had like 0 graphics in them. And then the first thing he works on is games for your phone. Because they got a contract from Japan, and they're just like, we need to make these because apparently in Japan they really like them, and this is how we will pay the bills. And so he's made like 12 or 13 of those. Not that he's proud of any of them, but he made them. And then he's like, okay, so stuff that works with that doesn't necessarily upscale very well. So you gotta be working for your platforms. Like, stuff for that doesn't really need a story. I mean, what was it? Rad Racer was one of the ones he worked on. And Rad Racer doesn't really have a story. You get in the car, you drive the race, go. But then you get to, forget one thing that he tried to cram a storyline into. It's like, this doesn't need a storyline because this doesn't work, but it has to have a storyline. We're on a bigger platform, like the DS. And when you get on the DS, you need to have a little bit more story because, hey, it's got a little bit more processing power. And then when you get to the Xbox or the PS3, 4 billion, you're gonna need a little bit more story because people are gonna expect it because you're in a console. So you just gotta realize, how much story do you need? Well, what are you working for? Not everything is gonna be Assassin's Creed, and even Assassin's Creed is not gonna be Assassin's Creed on your phone. That was essentially what it was.
Okay. So I was in the audio programming one, on this one. for Unity. So this is audio in Unity. And punchline here is audio in Unity is shit. So, like, Unity pretty much has, and I kind of found this out in London there, like, it really has no support for what you would want to do with audio in the engine. And that's at me at an indie level, like, coming off of, like, exact, like, just looking for some, like, exact level of tooling in the engine. That's not even there. Basically, it's like, you know, play wave. That's what you get. The guys that gave this, you know, talk, they were not Unity reps. These were two audio guys, or a programmer who does a lot of audio programming and then an audio sound designer. And then it also got to hear what you want to do on a AAA title, like what they do. Like, you know, the Call of Duty, the machine gun noise. They actually randomize and alter the frequency in real time by a random variable. So they're looping the same sound effect over and over, the machine gun shooting, they are varying the pitch and the speed of that slightly because that's how you would naturally perceive it. And that causes the sound to sound better to the players. But also, like, if you loop an audio item, you can get some really weird harmonics and things going if it loops identical, and stuff like that. So, they went into some, like, other ways that they kind of accessed raw audio data to build some of this stuff up. And he eventually got to a point where he showed them a plugin that was in progress, and they kind of asked, like, is there interest on this? Should we put this on the asset store? And there was a lot, but it also does seem the kind of area of, like, if it's this bad, and Unity's evolving this quickly, that I almost kind of expect, like, a 4.5 update to have, like, here's these significant things. Because everything they were talking about, everybody in the room was like, well, yes, you need that. To do audio in a game, you need a layering system of audio that has a priority and an auto-ducking, right? So, like, where I do audio ducking, you know, for, like, our voiceovers and our Let's Plays, where I duck the game volume when you speak and then let it come back up. That is in your main titles too. So, like, when there's dialogue, the music is ducked, and when the dialogue is done, it come back up. But maybe the music won't duck when there's machine gun fire because, you know, they want you to hear the music in that situation. There's layers and priorities, and there's also calculation caps because, you know, when you play two sounds at once, those add up decibel-wise, and you need to make sure you don't go over maximums or blow out someone's speakers. So the other thing, you don't have any notification when a sound ends in Unity. So you can't hook into an event and say, like, oh, when this sound is done playing, do this thing.
Can you test when a sound ends on update?
Yes. So that's the way you have to do it.
Okay.
But Unity's audio runs in a separate thread, so then communicating back with the primary threads becomes an issue. So you kind of have to work around it on that. There's looping issues in Unity if you loop an MP3. So if you're doing compressed audio for your platform and you select loop it, it'll create some artifacts that will play on your loop, and you'll hear a pop basically when it comes around. So you really have to create loopless sounds and pre-compress them before bringing them into Unity, and then just tell Unity not to do any compression. Which means you do kind of lose a platform feature of, like, give the high-def audio uncompressed to the PC, and then give the iOS version a compressed version of the audio with that. But they did call out a site, compuphase.com, where there's some MP3 gapless looping techniques, because when you compress MP3 data, you can the compression can introduce artifacts that make your looping, you know, so making it seamlessly looped and compressed is a bit of an art form, and they call that out for some tools on that site. Also, the length in Unity is misreported by the audio, so it's not actually a length in seconds, and it's not documented correctly either. It is actually the number of samples. So you need to take the number of samples divided by the frequency times the pitch or something like that, if you alter the pitch. To get the actual true length of the audio sample. I mean, yeah, so a lot of this was like, wow, this is kind of shit that this would be
That's confusing.
not
It
features.
it seems like a lot of stuff that they're probably, I mean, people could create plugins to patch up, but eventually Unity is going to fix.
Mm-hmm. There doesn't seem to be a lot in the asset store yet, because these guys were kind of working towards one of the first audio plugin systems. At least they didn't call any out. There are more features in Unity Pro for audio. Of course, that's like $1,500. So, there's that. But basically, you can access this thing called the DSP timeline, which will give you a raw access, and then you can hook into that and do a filtered read every 20 milliseconds of audio data. And, of course, you have new UI access from this thread. But from that, you can hook in. And it would be possible with that. I specifically pitched him the Captain Dubstep scenario. And, could that be built up from DSP Timeline? That level of integration. And it could, in theory. A lot of they had to say, in theory, this could work. But we haven't done it, so we don't know if there could be a performance issue. But that would be your gateway to access to do all the things you would want to do. So the other thing that they were building up and showing too is a more professional tool would have a node-based editor. And when they say node-based editor, basically mean a state machine, like we were talking about with the anime system, to where you would define in these conditions of the game, then play these audio effects. And it's this entire separate thing where audio is mapped out that way to game state instead of being integrated. It's kind of like a separate thing that the audio designer can then get in and tweak, then tweak and adjust and shore up and do the things, instead of having this process where the programmer codes some stuff and the audio guy listens to it and makes a whole bunch of notes and the programmer tries to implement them and they listen to it again and then there's a whole bunch more notes and then back and forth until the budget runs out and then, they're like, oh, whatever, ships with bad audio. So that was basically that section. Let's see, what else do we got? Wrapping out the end of the day, Cicely, you were in evaluating intrinsic and extrinsic motivation in games?
Oh my god, it was like going to that that dry conference where we were going, what was it, the professional gaming,
yes, Serious Games.
Games conference.
Educational gaming, yeah.
Yeah. Because he talked in the same manner with the same type of background and research done in it. And he would have been better if somebody had made him some slides and then he read off of them. He was that dry. Some of it was pretty interesting. But
I think we covered this afterwards. It was not the intrinsic versus extrinsic that was applied to at a game level that extra credits did. This was just why people play games level, right? It was a very, very high level. So really this one is watch the extra credits on intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards that is useful to your game design.
Yes, and by God, never ever print.
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on a bad session.
Stupid writing. I mean, the slides were unreadable at some point.
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on a bad session.
You will go ahead.
We're just going to bitch about the slides we're bad to read. That's...
Yeah.
So Dylan, Once Upon a Time?
It was basically a panel. It was by a level designer at, I believe, Epic. It was basically a panel about how you... kind of concepts you use to structure a game... game narrative in ways that the player can kind of control how they experience it. It was interesting, but it was very stream of conscious, so it was hard to pull out any, things you could actually implement. I guess if I was actually doing, AAA game design, maybe I could have gotten... It was basically the idea that, a 1-act, a 5-act, a 3-act setup isn't going to translate to a game because games are, the player has control over how they experience it to a certain degree. A predefined structure doesn't account for the players' agency and exploration. And in many cases, he made the argument that video games and online content in many cases are more akin to an oral tradition, which is repeated and changes slightly and isn't the same every time as compared to like a printed tradition. Like I said, it was interesting.
Abstract, or was this concrete? Did he give like, and here's how you implement this, and here are the techniques to allow a variation on the story each time you play through?
He gave some good examples. And he gave some, like, he had the, there's it may have been an episode of Extra Credits. He had, like, this video of Yahtzee reading the plot line for Halo 3, and he's like, yeah, that's nothing at all. Hearing someone read that is nothing at all like playing it. So he had some concrete examples. He had some kind of historical examples of things outside of game tradition or game history, but like he mentioned, like how John Singer Sargent, when he painted someone, would try to make them forget that they were being painted, so they'd be immersed in the experience. And I don't know. Like I said, it was interesting. He gave some concrete concepts, but it was very stream of consciousness. It was hard to pull out anything concrete that you could actually apply.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I mean that dovetails well into what I went to, which was sequence structure beyond the 3-act narrative and design.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna say, like, as far as I don't know if this was the best thing that I went to, because I think the keynote was better.
Yeah.
But this was by far, I think, the best session. Not that some of these others were bad; they were really good. But this is the one of like an aha opening moment. So the entire thing is revolving around aspects of the novel. I think is the book name that you would get into, and breaking down like the problem of a 3-act structure, both movies and games, right? And the problem, because you gave a 3-act structure. If you're not familiar with 3-act structure, Act 1 is a setup. Here's what's going on. Here's the problem that the hero must overcome. Act 2 is the escalation. You know, a whole bunch of shit happens and escalates. And you hit a climax, and then you're into Act 3, which is the resolution after the crisis point. And the problem is the Act 2 problem, right? Act 1 has a clear definition of what's going on. Act 3 has a clear definition of what's going on. You know, that's where you want to get to. That's the punchline that you're aiming for. Act 2 doesn't.
It just gets you from point A to point B.
It gets you to point A to point B, and so it's easy to get lost there in Act 2 and just have a whole bunch of random shit happen that kind of delays the plot, you know. And, you know, essentially, one thing he said to explain it in video games is like, you come up to a door that needs a key. And then you go on all this side shit to get the key. And then you come back and you unlock the door and you move through it, right? And if you draw that out as a visual representation of the plot, you draw a line, you make a circle that comes back to the line, and then you go on. And that circle is completely irrelevant to the game experience because it had nothing to do but find the key. And if it was gone, if it just had the key, the story would not have changed at all. And you could get into game design having a lot of these little circles of like, oh, we'll go make them go kill 10 of these things and then come back, or give them this side mission, or take this away from them and make them have to get it back. Like, you just come up with a bunch of bullshit to stretch the time of the game, and in a bad movie, you stretch this. But what he presented as a solution to this is the sequence structure, which he actually argues all the major Hollywood studios are actually using. Like, sequence structure is what's used. So, what you do is you simultaneously, you break it up into, like, sequences. So, like, if you have 8 separate distinct sequences throughout the movie, okay? Throughout the movie or throughout the game or whatever. You have these 8 sequences that are happening. And these are independent, almost like serials. Like, you know, they're little independent episodes. You can go watch one and be done, right? and it's a pick-up-and-play game experience. You know, Walking Dead. It was into 5 obvious sequences, right? Because it was into 5 chapters. Each one of those is something you can play, you can go on. But each one of these experiences is a 3-act structure in itself. So you take the 3-act structure and you apply it inside of the sequence and also outside of all sequences. So you go micro and macro at the same time. So the sequences add up to the 3-act structure, and they have the main quest gets launched and the main quest gets resolved. But you also have these mini 3-act sequences. So in each episode, each sequence that you have to have a setup, that you have to deal with the issue, then you resolve it. With one catch, which is the but. And the but is the cliffhanger that takes you to the next section. It's actually the setup for the next sequence. So he used Star Wars, because he was like, I hate doing this because everybody uses Star Wars, but everybody knows Star Wars. Alright? What's the problem? The problem is the Millennium Falcon got pulled into the Death Star. That's the problem. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to go hijack the tractor beam so we can take off. So we go and we fight, we hide on the thing so we can get off, and we can sneak over, we can get into the room, so we can do the tractor beam, but we learn the princess is on the Death Star. Right? Now, the next setup is, the princess on the Death Star, we can't leave without her, so we have to go rescue the princess. Right? And then, you know, this leads to, once you rescue the princess, right? Because we rescued the princess, this is what you have to get into. Because you rescued the princess, the stormtroopers and the Death Star now know you're here. Right? So before, it was, if you look at it in terms of game play, the first sequence that you played was a stealth sequence. You snuck up, you got to the room, then you snuck up to the princess's thing. And when you freed her, though, you set off the alarm. Now the gameplay is no longer a stealth game. Now it's an escape sequence, right? Now you're trying to get off, and you're trying to get out through the pits and all that, you know, so then you go through and all that. And the key is how these each overlap with each other. And it is driven by that because. Because the adventurers did this, now they do that. So it's not passive anymore in your storytelling. It's not just, these are the boring movies. These are the movies you go to, and it's like, well, a bunch of bad shit happened to these people. Those are unentertaining movies. Those are hard to relate to. Those become unbelievable. Of like, wow, all this bad stuff happening to the same person. You know,
bad stuff happening conveniently to further the plot.
Conveniently to delay the plot or fill time. Versus, no. Because you did this thing, you caused this consequence to happen, now you must deal with it. And little by little, these stones add up to the overall plot of, yeah, we still stop the Death Star. We still go and fight the rebels. But now you feel like you've gone on an honest journey. Right?
Mousetrap.
Yeah. You got through all the steps. You took part in all the steps. They all happened because you were involved. And, you know, while this is good for the movies, this is crucial, from his opinion, for the games, because the player needs to feel an involvement. It's like Mass Effect, right? So we're playing through Mass Effect, is one of the things we're doing. But there's a lot of bullshit side quests of like, hey, the world is fucking ending. We'd really like you to go over here and, like, go get back my speeder because, you know, the cops impound. And if you could just work that out for me, that'd be great. It's just filler.
The JRPG syndrome.
Yeah.
It's just an RPG filler thing, and it's like, I didn't do that. Now, he did go into the talk and say, like, hey, most of this, you know, applies to, like, he did Dead Space 2, I believe it was, the one that I hated. But he was also quick to say,
because you haven't played 3
I
yet.
was contracted, I wrote the script. They wanted 12 episodes. So, we agreed upon in contract to do 12 sequences. 12 levels, right? They want 12 levels. Those are 12 sequences. I write my 12 sequences. They decide to cut it down to 10. And then they decide at the last minute they need 15. So he's like, don't go to Dead Space 2 and look at the levels as the sequence breaks. But if you do go to Dead Space 2, you might be able to piece together what they were actually planned to be, but they no longer line up with it because, you know, most writers are brought in at one phase, and then they're not part of the whole process. So he did have a little chip on his shoulder about that. And then I was like, okay, you've redeemed yourself. Because when you said I wrote Dead Space 2, I was like, oh, well, fuck this. I'm going to flip the table and walk out now. If that's your credentials, even though all this seems really great, it's not working for you. But then when he explained that, but he did explain, like, the single-player, heavy, narrative-driven action game is where this works best. But he has ideas, and he thinks you could adapt this to a JRP, an RPG, an action RPG, and then even get into open world. Although it does become more tricky.
Yeah.
You know? And he thinks what you need to do is allow the player to decide when the main story gets to advance, right? So instead of telling the player, oh, the world is ending, you know, and you have to go save it right now because you've got the main thing, and, you know, you have to crucible and go put it in the thing and unlock the key and save the universe. But don't take these guys as 3 sidequests card. What you need to do is, if the player chooses to do the quests that advance the main plot, then you have to just let the player go through the game without hitting the subplots. But at each phase, kind of offer them 3 equally important things to do and not tell them which one of those is the main plot. And then allow the player to choose to do all 3 before moving on to the next stage. Do they want to kind of be a completionist player and you want to cater to that? Or it's like, no, I feel the rush. I need to go do the next thing, and allow them to go do the next thing and don't punish them because they didn't do the other 2. If that's just the way that.
So provide a little more structure to open world, but not too much.
Too much. But he said it's definitely an interesting challenge, and he like put up his contact information, and he was like, contact me here if you want me to take a stab at it professionally for you. You know, like I'd love to solve this problem. He also did talking about how it helps the flow of your game too. Right? Extra Credits does a whole thing where they talk about the flow of your game, in that, you want to have difficult parts followed by empowerment parts of the game. And like, if you have these sequences going, you just have this natural way of allowing this to be an empowerment sequence versus this to be a difficult sequence, you know, so that we pace the game out in a way that is rewarding to the player, you know, because it can't be cake all the time and it can't be dirt all the time. You know, it has to balance the two to make it feel like real progress and enjoyment. So, let's see, what was everybody else doing? I think we wrapped up that one, right?
That was the end of that.
That was the end of that day. So Cliff B's keynote. I didn't actually take notes in his keynote.
I did not either.
His keynote really was a collection of his recent Tumblr posts.
Yeah.
If you go and you read his Tumblr, his posts about, like, why does it have to be indies versus mainstream? And unfortunately, he doesn't have a good perspective on some of what the real arguments are. And I've said this on our podcast where, you know, he equates some of the loud posting to be serious issues when it's not. And then he doesn't realize some of the more serious issues that run a little deeper. He's not seeing, like, a difference. He's like, oh my god, everybody flipped out about Diablo's, you know, color change. And then, you know, nobody had a problem with buying that game. And it's like, Cliff, that was not a serious issue. That was just a slow news day. The DRM issue in SimCity,
that was a big
issue. And it's actually hurt them. Seriously. That game is not taking off. The rumors of always online DRM is a big issue. The complaints of what a fighter game actually costs, not a real issue. You know, you have to separate the noise from what's real. And also, Why is it indie versus AAA? Because you guys kind of do come in and annualize everything and force a DRM that no one wants, and there's no new IP really coming out of the major publishers. There's no Braids, there's no Fezzes, there's no Papers, Please, you know? There's nothing risk-taking coming out. You're not taking a portion of the budget and say, hey guys, put 5 men on a team, go make something. Because we have the money to fund you for a year. So something within a 5-man team for a month, we can fund that. You're not taking that risk. So you deserve some of the hate from Jonathan Blow, because it's fine that you focus on Call of Duty, but you can't claim the artistic credit anymore.
I think his point was that there is a space for both of those games, therefore, not necessarily that he's... I mean, obviously he is firmly in the AAA side of things. And not that... But basically that there is space for both of those, and it's not a zero-sum game. Which I think is less about what the industry should do and more about how the internet should respond to
a lot of that,
the
like,
industry.
Why do people yell at me on the internet? You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, because it's the internet.
I was going to say, I don't think it's a horrible thing. Like, I think those are discussions that need to be had, and maybe if someone prominent says it, then maybe it will get through. Again,
like, developing a barometer to, like, okay, what's the real fire, or is it a bunch of smoke?
Yeah.
You know,
is this just a vocal minority, or is this something that everyone is
not
saying?
Distinguishing between the DRM issues and then just, like, some fighting game of the week drama.
That's probably true. Like, with
a detriment because you're missing the serious issues.
Like the AAA versus indies issue, it's probably a lot of vocal people on either side that either think indie games are stupid or AAA games have sold out, when most people probably play a mix of both. Yeah,
the majority is probably playing both. So when we opened up the next day, is that night Hipster Lattes? Is that when we had the Hipster Lattes?
No, Hipster Lattes was the next night.
Oh, okay. So
wait, Hipster Lattes.
That was
I think
weird EA party.
I think Hipster Lattes was lunch that day.
No, was it a lunch? Did we have Hipster Lattes for lunch?
Wait.
Yeah.
No, because I had a beer.
So one lunch was the Hipster Diner.
Don't remember there.
One lunch was Hipster Diner.
I think that was the second day lunch.
That was the second day lunch. Okay.
Yeah. First day lunch was
We had Hipster Lattes. We had
the Asian Fusion was the first lunch.
No, Asian Fusion.
Oh yeah,
was
that's
the
right.
First lunch.
That is right. Sorry.
We had the Farmhouse weird place. I don't know what you would classify this restaurant as, because it's like, you know, it's where I got, like, the farmer's wife, which was like a deconstructed shepherd's pie or something.
Wait, was that the Capitol Club or something?
It was
some
where we
16. It had deer antlers on the wall.
Yes, it had deer antlers.
Okay, yes, it looked like. I don't know.
Yeah. We had a lot of hipster cuisine. We took in a lot of hipster cuisine. Hipster Lattes. So the enchiladas came out. It was 3 enchiladas. And they came out, one was covered in a green chili. Mm-hmm. One was covered in on a red, just enchilada sauce, but it was kind of orangish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? It was like food dyed orange. And then the other was covered in sour cream. And they were covered like total solid strips. And when you looked at them, they made the flag of Mexico. And that's
because of course they did.
They were hipster lattes. They were also served on a wooden-ass carved plate.
Oh, and they had...
No, wait, the menus were wood.
The menus were super wood carved.
The menus were on a plank of wood.
A plank of wood that had been hand carved and sanded and hand painted.
And then a skinny-ass white dude with one earring came out to ask how we liked all the food. He was probably the head chef.
Hipster.
Yes.
He looked like he wanted to strike up a conversation on fine dining and etiquette, and may I suggest a wine with your meal, and I'm just like, go away.
It was all good food, though.
Yes, it was.
It was. Downtown Raleigh, taking all the food, it was
just
excellent.
Ignore the hipsters and eat the food. It's wonderful.
Like I said there, I don't like the hipsters, but I like the hipsters' culture.
Yeah, it's good for food, but not necessarily good for...
So, all right. Next morning, we get up, and Cicely, you hit teaching level design through visual communication. No, wait. Building epic worlds through the strength of art sourcing. Art sourcing, Cicely. What is art sourcing? Now, me and Jane Dillon had an idea that was buying all your assets, and then you had a different... What was your idea of art sourcing?
Google.
And what was art sourcing?
Basically going out and buying people to give you some art assets. Because they were talking about, okay, was it Blizzard? It didn't matter. We at one of these large super studios don't always have time to do everything in the thing. But so we go to talented people out there. Maybe they have a DeviantArt page. You'd never know. And we find people who want to do art for this for a small chunk of money. And then we say... Was
it seriously like DeviantArt page people?
There were DeviantArt page people.
So it was like slave wages. It was like,
yup,
we're gonna severely underpay you
That's cool, because you love doing this stuff.
You love this. I mean, you got to work for Blizzard. Isn't that amazing?
And you might get a little bit more if we use you in the exclusive art book, even if it doesn't go in the game.
Wow. Wow. That's excellent. Let's see. What else is on there? How do you succeed as an indie developer, Dylan?
That was a panel by several different... smaller developers. It had the problem you discussed earlier, where these were people who had spun off their own studios, gone full time, or had taken a job at a smaller studio. So in many cases, they were talking about, you want to take contract work so you can keep yourself afloat between doing games.
So game dev story?
Getting
the life?
Sort of, but what was interesting was they kind of talked about, basically, if you're trying to succeed as an indie, it's basically all the things we've said and heard before, like, you can make a good game, but that does not mean you're going to make money off of it. It takes persistence. You kind of have to think about what you're putting out there, both, you have to take a look at the market, but you also have to know what your strengths are and not try to chase, like, for example, I think one of their examples was they chased casual games. They tried to make a casual game. They're not people who play casual games, and it didn't work out. They also got into some of the issues of monetization and things like that. One of the things they kept coming back to was, if you're going to start out, well, first of all, there's a lot of questions you have to ask when deciding whether you're going free versus paid with your games. But if you do go paid, always make sure there is some sort of hook where you can make it free later on. And in fact, that can result in a bigger surge than a straight-up free release. Going from
start paid
to
and then...
Yeah. Have that plan that if things go south, you can, you can rely on in-app purchases and go to free-to-play.
So did he give any, suggested entry prices?
Not really. Let me see. There's a couple other interesting tidbits that they mentioned. If you're looking to kind of build your brand, the community isn't there on mobile like it is on PC. So
loyalty of a studio is an exception.
Yeah. And in fact, in many cases, it's a crapshoot. Like the guy who did Temple Run was not on the panel, but their big example here was he doesn't even know why that succeeded like it did. Mobile is just kind of a crapshoot. Ad-supported is a horrible way to make money. It also tends to anger players. and the in-app purchase to remove ads just feels shady.
Now, we've talked about that too, though, on the podcast in the past, of like the way that Hero Academy and I think Jetpack Joyride did it, not 100%. They may not have done it on Jetpack Joyride. But it was like there was ads in there for the free version and you were playing it. The first purchase removed ads also.
Yeah.
So it's like you bought another team in Hero Academy, ads were removed. Like, if you just buy anything, buy some money, or buy an art pack, or buy an avatar, you don't care what you buy. Just anything that you buy will turn off the ads. So it wasn't like a specific, like, purchase option. I think that's a good way to go about it, though.
Yeah, definitely. That way it's not kind of this shady, like, we know you want those ads to go away, so we're going to try to get you. It's like,
piss you off.
Hey, guess what?
If you pay for the game, which you don't need the ads anymore.
But it just doesn't make a lot of money. They actually said that making a bunch of small free games early on helps to get your name out there. They did actually lean on that a lot. Like, especially if you go full time, you're trying to start your own studio, contract work is going to help you stay afloat. You need to get out, network, do good things for other people, because eventually it will kind of come back to you when you need it. Again, succeeding as an indie dev is kind of a loaded title, considering you get into the panel and they are like, it's kind of a crapshoot. But it was good. Very realistic look at what it's like.
So, this hour, I went to a Serious Games panel. Why so serious? I was gonna hit a couple of points and move off of it, because, there was not a whole lot of great stuff. It was another, I want to say it actually was another doctor. And so the way these go is usually like, they have some grant money that they're justifying or applying for, and by presenting their paper, that checks a box. And so it felt a little like that. In this, but so they did say, somebody said there that ECGC was considering, like, next year or something, doing a Serious Games Jam. So doing a game jam before the conference, focused at, like, serious games. And I actually spoke to the woman a little bit on this, got her contact information, need to follow up with that, and said, yeah, I'm kind of interested in that if you get that going. Because I said the problem is that we need to get more industry people talking to the people in the serious games, because these guys have the metrics and the data that could do some really cool things. Like, if this behavior exhibits, then the child may have autism, but the child is 2, so you can't, like, do a normal test because they're 2 years old, right? They're still developing language skills. It's hard to tell if they're dyslexic, They may just be still learning to read. But there are other ways to do that, and through a game, the child can play the game, and they can do that. But I'm saying, but the problem is what these guys consider a game
is not fun.
It's not fun at all, and what's worse is, like, if the fail state of the game, right, is losing the game, or not completing things on time, or being able to do the game, is a diagnosis towards dyslexia, that's even worse. Now the kid knows, like, if I can't play this crappy game, something's wrong with me. And I'm like, what we need to do is we need to get people together for things like Minecraft. And it's like, okay, how can we hook into Minecraft so you can allow the kids to go in and do whatever they want in Minecraft, and then just get the data out, and then go and notice, like, a dyslexic child, an autistic child will do these things. These are the behavioral patterns in Minecraft that they will do. The kids are having fun, and nothing is ever wrong, because there's no fail state in Minecraft, especially if you're playing in creative. But if there's behavioral patterns that can, come out of that. So I have an interest in doing that, because I think if more game designers could pair up with the PhDs, and both were open to, one, understanding the needs of the research, but two, understanding that the game still has to be fun, there could be some really cool shit done here. There's a lot of room in this space, but the way it's approached now, especially as long as it's called Serious Games and it's thrown in some category,
Serious Games sounds like something else.
It sounds like
it's
something
kind of
else,
vague,
and it segregates it because the academics want to look at it like we're not part of your Call of Duty world and all that, your entertainment games that are waste. These are serious games. And then the game designers look at that as like, fuck you, our games aren't serious. You know what I mean? It's like, we still deal with everything that you talk about, and you don't give credit, so why should I listen to you? So I think there's that problem with it. So he did talk a lot about, though, trying to use commercial off-the-shelf software. Like, can you take a commercial off-the-shelf software game, mod it, and then use that as your serious game? Because the game's already proved to be fun and popular at that point. So that was mentioned there. I thought that was good. But he did say, you know, one out of 6 students are bored at school every day. Report being bored at school every day. 1 out of 6. 65%. Oh no, 1 out of 6 are bored in every class. 65% are bored in at least one class every day. It's a lot of bored kids. You know, and that's a lot of, like, we're not reaching, you know, the kids with their curriculum, if that's the case. Because if you're bored, you're not engaged, you're not learning. Blah, 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 blah. Funny that where they have the definition of game comes in. Because he had a great quote, nobody argues against a chess club. It's a club built around a game. No school ever throws out the chess club. There's never a problem with the chess club. Make it a video game, all of a sudden it's an issue and it's a waste of time, money, and resources. But chess club, no. So he talked a little bit about that. But that's all really I got on that one. Let's see. Let's jump to the next hour. Let's start off here. Dylan at the top. One technique to rule them all, prototyping?
Yeah, this was... It was more for larger studios, because it was basically a story of how this company had started employing prototyping more. In sort of their Agile or Scrum process, where basically you start out the day, you build a prototype for this thing you want to do. Everyone takes a look at the prototype, gives feedback, and then you keep working with it until it becomes what you want. And the idea was...
prototypes the game, or are these like... No, the game is one main chunk of code, and then to add things to it, we do separate prototypes.
I think it could go either way. I mean, they did touch on that there are different types of, you know, paper prototypes, digital prototypes, concept art. I think it could be within the game. It could be a separate branch. They didn't get too deep into that. It was more about the software development process. The idea was that instead of having meetings to discuss something, instead of using analogies, instead of preaching about what you think the player wants, or instead of like falling prey to optimism bias, just prototype it, get feedback, kind of put this into your development process. So it was interesting, but it was also hard to relate if this is not your day job. But it wasn't specifically about how to create prototypes.
So Cicely, you were in Lessons in Interactive Narrative?
This one was about how to get the player. It's hard. It was kind of back and forth. How to get the player to be able to tell their own story while still being able for you to tell the story that you're wanting to tell. So it's about player choice, basically, and still being the player still able to have their own story within, say, your Mass Effects. Like, my shepherd is my shepherd, but my shepherd still went out and saved the world. It was kind of convoluted, and I didn't really remember much of it. I think I slept through a portion of it with my eyes open.
Alright, so I hit a developer to owner, turning your game into your company. It's another, starting up a game company. Again, so this was run by some guys that were a little bit older, that have been doing it a long time. So the problem there is they've been doing it a long time. So they've been independent since the 80s. Right? So, I don't know that much their advice, I don't know the relevance that you could give to their advice today. But some of the things are still out there. Have a partnership agreement, a corporation, have something, written down before any money is coming in so that everybody can have an understanding of who owns what, essentially. Who gets what and who owns what. Decide that up front. Contractors, make sure when you're doing contracts there's a clear set of expectations, and also who owns what, because there'll be really bad contracts out there written that will try to own everything you're doing at your studio while you're under contract, even if it's not for the contract. So it's just, again, like you said earlier, like it's like the dawn of the music industry.
Yeah.
Of like, we're gonna screw you if we can.
Sign this thing to give us,
make sure you have an assignment of rights. Should someone leave, like you have an address if like someone leaves the company, everything they did if it wasn't outlined before, so that it is the company owns it essentially, and then everybody then owns a piece of the company in turn, that kind of stuff. NDAs, not much of a legal thing in the game development industry. People sign them a lot, not really like going to be contested, but small industry, your reputation can go to shit fast and you won't have any work, basically, if you break NDAs. So, the thing they also said is on these NDAs is to make sure they all have an expiration in time and an expiration if the knowledge covered by the NDA goes public. Right? So, like, if the stuff is out there, here's what they said. They're like, they got these NDAs, they might still be under for stuff that documentaries have been made on now. But they could get in trouble if they talk about it because they're under a non-disclosure agreement. And it is, kind of stupid. So, they said just to make sure that that's clear, make sure if you're signing an NDA, if you're doing that, you have those things in there. Companies, when you do contracts with them, they all have two sets of documents. One evil, one not. He's like, seriously, straight up. They have the evil take ownership of everything, and then they have these people know what they're doing, so give them the realistic...
So basically, if you haggle with them, that you will get the good.
And it's gotten to the point where, the guy that was there, one guy who does a lot of the legal stuff, he goes straight up in and tells them, do not let me find out I am not on the good set of paperwork. Do not let me find out that there is another set at this company. Right? Or I will end the partnership. Right? That you make a habit of this or something like that. So he just goes in just straight out and tells them, I know you have two sets of documents. Don't let me find out you're giving me the shittier of the two. Or this ends badly. So that's good to know though. But he was like, yes, they all have them. All of them will have them. Two sets of every standard document. Right? One nice, one not so nice. And they'll try to get you to sign the not so nice first and take ownership of everything. Basically, how bad it is on the first contract is a sign of how bad it's going to get. So if they're a big pain in the ass to get that first contract signed and a whole lot of legal back and forth and all that, just not worth it. It's going to get worse at every step of the engagement, and probably for any game dev, if you're doing like that, there'll be more contracts than just the initial one will come up. Let's see. Avoid non-competes on both sides. Like if they want you to sign a non-compete, don't. And don't make your employees sign a non-compete. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
It's a hurting thing and it's just a stupid thing. You own the IP, right? You own the assets in the IP. Don't restrict the person. Let's see. Of course, they talk about you can't copyright the rules of a game. So what you can copyright. So a lot of copyright, patents, trademarks. One thing to be aware of, if you're just graduating school and you've got a project that you worked in school, a lot of schools have evil contracts that say they own everything you did while you attended that school. So if you made a game as a project for a class or even outside of class, colleges have shit that says they own that shit. And it's disgusting. And they actually said, like, refuse to sign that at your college or go to a different college. Like, that practice needs to stop, and it needs to be called out on a college. You're paying them for crying out loud. And that is just sick and disgusting. But be aware of that, because it has happened where publishers have signed contracts with these guys doing the game, and then the college finds out that they're doing a published contract, and that is exactly when the college will sue, and then it gets dropped, because the publisher doesn't have anything to do with it. But the college will get greedy to take profits of it. So, make sure you're legal with all software. That seems to be obvious, but, like, if you've got an illegal copy of 3D Studio Max or an academic copy, you can't publish a game with that. Get legal. Use legal stuff on everything. You can get big enough, you will get tracked down. You know, it will happen. Let's see. Contractors. A lot of times there are indemnification clauses. So if you have people contract for you, you need to make sure you have an indemnification clause, which basically says, if you put shit in your code that you didn't have the rights to, we're not liable. And so if you have contractors that work for you, because the contractor you signed for will have that in there, so that if they get sued for something, that turns out to be you didn't have the rights to put this song or whatever in the game, then they have an indemnification clause that says the lawsuit passes through to you, and then you're liable for everything from that. So make sure that you kind of have that same protection for yourself. They talked about the new model is sell IPs, not studio. So if you want to, as you grow, sell your IP, but do not sell your studio. So don't allow your studio to be purchased. Just go ahead and say, like, okay, well, you want this hit franchise, right? We'll sell you that and then contract for 2 years to do development on it while it hands off, but you will not buy our studio. Because that just causes you to have to create a new studio after that transfers, and then you leave and all of that. And, you know, one of the guys are like, I have sold like 3 or 4 studios, you know? But like the new model seems to be very much going like, take control of your studio and sell that IP. And also, it's like there's a similar shift happening. It happened in Hollywood in the 1950s, where the studios owned all of the IP. The publishers owned all of the IP. So like the publishers would own the movie. This happens in a few cases. Paramount owns Star Trek. Okay? Nobody but them are going to do anything Star Trek related. But for the most part now, not the distributors, but the studios are owning the IP, and they're just being contracted to produce the next movie in the series. Not all the time true. The very, very big ones, you know, are Star Trek, Avengers, those things, you know, those are owned by the people publishing it as well. But for the majority of that stuff, it is now a negotiation thing of like, hey, I want to make this movie, you know, like Clerks. You know, Kevin Smith goes and makes Clerks. Kevin Smith has the right to make Clerks too, right? Even though Miramax published him, right? Distribute that movie.
He doesn't have to go with
They
Miramax.
don't own the rights to Clerks and the properties of Clerks. Anything that happens in the Clerks universe is still Kevin Smith's. They just own the movie. And they said a similar thing is going to happen in video games. That shift is happening already and it's underway. So line up with that. Yeah, that's what I got for my session there. That was develop your own company. So now we're back to the morning. No, we're back to the top of the Vic, and it is how to become a unicorn, the elusive designer programmer.
I expected this to be a panel about both disciplines, and it was really more about if you're a designer or if you're anything else, how to get into programming. They did start...
Highly useful for you, then.
Highly useful for me, yes. Actually, I mean, they did talk about different... I think they talked about monogame and XNA and something called... Can't remember the... There were a couple frameworks they talked about, and a couple tools to kind of get into it, and how actually learning to program will actually help you think better because it gives you kind of a model to use, but... Yeah, it was kind of like, okay. I didn't even transcribe my notes into Evernote, if that tells you anything. So
similar on that tact, I went to self-publish or not. That is the question. This was awful. No slides. The guy had no slides. It was insanely basic information with no guidance or experience backed up. It was 15 minutes of content. And then a bunch of people asked 30 minutes of questions after that to stretch it, which were mostly answered by other people in the room and not the presenter. So that was a bad session. Cicely, a talk with Keith Shepard.
Yes, he did Temple Run and a couple other things, and he's married to his co-partner, and both of them did code, and neither of them had any art background, but she played classical piano, so she could do the music. And then they made it, the first thing they did was, we're going to hire an artist, because that's what we're lacking. So that was kind of fun. He was trying to mostly talked about his life and what he went through, and that they have a 10-month-old child, and programming with a 10-month-old child is difficult.
I think we all ended up in the All-Star Write Club at that point.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and that was just a little panel game where the writers were given kind of like a topic, and then it was hilarious and wonderful. The keynote. So the keynote that day was Jason Vandenberg, and he is a Ubisoft creative director. And I think he oversaw Far Cry 3. So he's way up there. And he gave this wonderful talk that he has given at GDC and several other places, so you can pull this up online and get into the depth of this. Basically, how there are this personality test called Ocean. So if you look that up, it's kind of like a Myers-Briggs type testing. But so basically, it lines you up on these 5 axes. One of the axes, the narcissistic axis, actually wasn't relevant to games because they're all reasons.
I think it was neurotic, actually.
Neurotic, that's what it is. Yeah. Were all reasons to quit playing games. So he left that one off. But he's been able to statistically map genres to these personality types. And now if you can take the test, you can pretty much predict the types of games you play. So then he just basically went through a bunch of examples of how that works. And his big points and takeaways on this were to then play these games as a game designer from the perspective now of understanding the personality types that play that game, to understand why they play that game, so that you may not enjoy it, but you can enjoy it from the perspective, like you can shift your perception. So like, I don't personally find this to be the most favorable thing, but if somebody plays a JRPG, they're all about, this completionist and this quest thing, and these are the attributes that they want that their personality lines up with. So if I'm working on designing a JRPG, or I'm putting a JRPG mechanics in there, I know why they love these games. And he talked about playing, like, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games, like when he was at, I think he said EA or Activision, not Ubisoft.
Yeah, he said it was, I don't know that he ever said which it was.
They
it was
had
just
a
at a major.
library of, like, all games ever. And he just started, like, his rule was to play all the games.
At least an hour?
At least an hour, no matter how bad or much he hated it. And he did that for, like, 2 years.
And then he just, every time he picked a personality type to
play the game as.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to play this game as, this personality type. You can find that a lot of that, the details on online. It was an excellent keynote. It was well worth the conference, I thought.
I took picture notes.
Yeah. And kind of like the other keynote, it was one that I feel like it's helpful to game designers, but it would actually be, it's a type that every serious, like, hardcore gamer almost needs to see this, so that we have more people who can identify what they like and don't like, and understand, like, their blind spots, their personality blind spots. Instead of just going, it sucks because I don't like it.
Yeah, right. He said it was to develop accurate empathy.
Yes.
Yeah. So he did a funny thing on there of like, look, I'm not telling you have to be a better person, but if you're going to be a game designer, your job is to be a better person. right? And if you
Yeah.
can't cut it, you need to leave, right? And, you need to be tolerant of all different types of games, all different types of enjoyment. You need to just suck it up, and you can't go like, oh, those games are stupid now. Like people who play StarCraft are dumb. Like, you can have that argument unless you're a game designer, and then you need to suck it up and understand that. So all of these, I sent the ECGC people an email, and I also tweeted them, followed up with that on a tweet. Neither got a reply. They're supposed to be posting video. A lot of these sessions were recorded, and they said, like, within a few days. And none of that shit has gone online.
I knew it would be, like, months.
And, yeah, so I'm like, what's the timetable on that? And got no response. So I was hoping by the time we sat down and did this, we could link to these sessions that we went to, especially the ones that we really enjoyed, and said, hey, call these out. Also, I'm going to go back and rewatch the Unity sessions myself, just to, like, now that I have Unity, to pause that and do that, and then run it, and then pause that and do that, so I kind of really let it sink in. So hopefully those will appear online. However, I may have lucked into getting a lot of these, because a lot of these were GDC talks that people gave.
Yeah.
And I subscribed, I mentioned this on the last podcast, that I was like, you know what? I want to subscribe to a magazine again. Just like to have a magazine, to read articles in print, And I was on this and I saw like a subscribe page, $50 a year to Game Developers Mag, right? GD Mag, which is the one that does a big survey. They got a website and everything, but they still have exclusive content for the magazine. And I'm like, wow, it's $50. I looked at this when in 1996, 97, because like as I've said before, I've read a lot of books on programming games before I ever actually got involved in doing it. And I looked at subscribing to it, and it was like $200. Because it's a trade journal, right? And that's what trade journals went for. And I'm like, oh, I can't justify that. Especially at the time I was in the Air Force, making like $10,000 a year. There's no way I can justify this and let it go. So now I'm kind of like, yeah, this is awesome. I can subscribe to this now and get it. And in the very first issue, I turned to the editor's letter, and the magazine has been shut down. Next issue will be the last issue. And I'm like, motherfuckers, you better fucking refund me some money. I just fucking paid this. I'm gonna get 2 issues out of a whole $50 annual subscription? No, fuck that. So, I didn't get on there and email them or anything like that before their email came out. What they're doing is, refund the money. Like, hey, you're entitled to like $40 back from your $50. Or, we will give you 4 months access to the GDC Vault. Now, I also looked at the GDC Vault. The GDC Vault is like $600 a year, or $700 a year, or fucking high enough that it felt stupid. Like, I'm not going to pay $600 to access the sessions in the Vault. But now, I can get 4 months free. So I opted for that. So I might grab and rewatch the last. Unfortunately, I can't link to that stuff because it'll be behind the vault. But yeah, so I might make an effort to watch that on. Hopefully, they have like a Roku player or something, so I can just watch them in the evening or when I eat. I can just log in with an account. That'd be really nice. But so all right, that wraps up this podcast. No idea when the next one will be. I kind of have some ideas of topics. It'll be just back to me doing it solo again. We'll do these, everybody, as issues come up or time allows, or we go to special events. But right now, got an ongoing thing, medical, but it's pretty much my month, and half of next month too. So it may not be until July until I'm back on a regular pace again and everything settled down. In the meantime, we will be able to kick back up our Let's Play videos. We'll get back running again because all the Nintendo stuff is gone now. We can post again into the account. So, thank you for everyone who tunes in to YouTube, who watches we're not live streaming this one. Watches every tunes into YouTube or downloads the audio podcast. And I will be back at some point in the future. So I saw you were doing blenders this week.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing Blender for? What's the plan?
Well, you've got a handy dandy new 3D printer.
So, about that.
Uh-oh. What's wrong with it?
Well, depends on your definition of wrong.
Okay.
Like, if something has never worked, it can't be broken, right?
Wait, what?
Are you trying to justify spending $1,000 on something that's not working by semantics?
Do you plead the fifth?
It may work. The date at which it will work is undetermined.
Well,
I'm no shit, like, waiting on firmware still for the thing.
well, considering how
Balancing and leveling it, so, like, a couple other people bought this Pie Maker as well, have, like, and they're having to recompile custom firmware. And
that blows my mind, because, like, it's got to work for someone, or why would they put out the firmware
well,
and the...
I don't know that it's worked for someone. I don't have confirmation of it having worked for someone. I mean, there was an error in the current firmware where, like, because it's on a circle, one of the quadrants doesn't print right, which means you wouldn't be able to print from the center. You have to print in one of the other quadrants, which is weird.
Yeah, and it also limits the size of the thing you can create.
Tomorrow... Where was I going? I was going for Dropbox. Tomorrow, I'm going to go down and take it down to TechCo with Eric, and we're going to kind of look at it and give it a shot. But I've already braced for I'm going to strip it for parts and build a standard Cartesian coordinate 3D printer. Because I have the printer board, I have the heating element, the extruder, I have all the stepper motors, I have the rods. I have a lot of components that you need. Like, I can buy a frame for some of the more popular ones. I can just buy the frame for like $60-70 off of eBay. I can download the schematics and make them myself if I wanted, but there's people who are doing like wooden laser cut versions of all the parts.
Yeah.
Which also, like, seeing some of the guys cracked acrylic. Mine is broken. Like, there's a little piece broken off of mine when I got it, and it's like, oh, it's just not a big deal. I'm just like, kind of a fucking big deal, you know, like.
For what I paid for it.
Yeah, I'm like, just to, like, it hadn't even, like, gotten together yet, and there's this little piece, and like, oh, don't worry about it, like, the screw doesn't really touch that part anyway. And I'm not sold on it, like, I'm looking at it, and another thing that occurred to me is that, I don't know to what degree this should matter, but it's printing on a radial disc, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a motor in the center that you can turn. Normal stepper motors, I don't know if we've got anything different. They can turn to your average, or your common one, to 200 positions, radius. Works out to be about 1.8 degrees, right? That you can do. Now, of course, you can use gears to up and down that ratio, right? So I don't know, I haven't looked at the gearing on it or anything like that. But the printing surface is circular. The further you go out from the center, the bigger travel distance, 1.8 degrees, let's just say it's 1 degree. The smallest I can move the turntable is 1 degree.
So Cartesian...
At the base, at the center, that's not going to matter. But at the edge, that's going to be like half a centimeter.
So basically...
So I can't make a turn shorter than half a centimeter. Really cuts down, like, how the shit's going to look. Now, I don't know if it's that bad or not, but that's an inherent problem to this design. That's, like, not something you're going to compensate.
Like, if it... And would this only affect, like, the polar system versus the Cartesian?
Coordinates.
Yeah.
You have an X, Y, and Z, and you position the head.
But it's a limitation of the coordinate system more than it is the mechanical parts. See, that's where I can't.
It is inherent to the design. It's not a part you can replace. Now, like I said, you could up the where the hell did I put it in the ECGC folder. There we go. Now I found it. So, I put it in... The other issue is that to calculate the movement correctly, this is where I'm not sure anything is actually printed off of this thing. So before, the custom firmware was all about taking Cartesian coordinates, which is the model that you send into it, converting it to polar so that it could be printed.
Mm-hmm.
But now, like, as these guys are having prints, and so, like, some of the other people have printed it, they got these really messy prints coming out, right? And he's like, oh, okay, so wait a minute. So what I actually need to do is convert Cartesian to polar back to Cartesian so that the stepper motors get an absolute value of how they have to go. Because you still have 3 stepper motors driven off an X, Y, and Z axis.
So what's the point of even doing Cartesian coordinates?
Well, I mean, it's still a polar thing. So
yeah.
The Cartesian coordinates won't look the same when they come out, because it's going to be now in Cartesian, like how much it needs to spin on each of these axes or something. I don't know. I was following it, and it's like, that's the part of the framework update I'm working on. And at this point, I'm tapping out. Like,
it almost feels like it needs to run both of them at the same time so that it can figure it out.
No, it runs them at the same time. That's the problem. It's that
there has to be one version of the truth.
There's still 3 stepper motors that move in sync that are known as X, Y, and Z on the printer board. So when he's sending the polar coordinates are 2 factors. Right? It's the angle and a rotation, or the rotation
angle and
the length.
Yeah.
So it's an angle and a length. Specifies a coordinate in polar coordinates, right? How far from the center and what angle from the center. You have 3 motors that have to synchronize with 2 variables, right? You need 3 variables. You need to tell each motor what it's doing when it's doing it. So you're going to go back to a Cartesian system, but it's going to be kind of this weird perverted Cartesian system. It's not going to look like on a normal grid anymore, because the motors are not in X, Y, and Z position.
It kind of sounds like the equivalent of trying to take something from RGB to CMYK or something. Like, it's not going to quite work, but it's kind of going to work.
Your plugin runs in CMYK, your source data is RGB, you convert to CMYK to run the plugin or the filter, the colors in it, but the monitor is RGB. And you need color-accurate representation, so then you go back to RGB. And it's just like, okay, look, if you record the shit, and then transfer the shit, and then transfer the shit back, you lose fidelity.
This is not the language you are looking for.
Yeah, and even though it's like it's all math, and it should all work out,
it doesn't.
It just sounds like going over your shoulder to reach your elbow. I mean, it sounds convoluted.
Because it is.
Nobody has gotten this thing to work that I know has ordered it off the Kickstarter. And hey, man, it's Kickstarter.
Oh, yeah, I guess that is true.
It's not pre-orders, I'm not buying a thing, it's funding a startup, and,
You got a thing.
I got a thing from it, and...
It almost works.
60, probably another $100.
I like how you're using the generic "a thing" as in, well, it doesn't really do
exactly what I wanted it to.
Exactly.
They tried.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like I got all the parts. So I got the expensive parts, and they're the same on all printers. And I just need to order one of the kits that have the frames, because I can. The other thing is I got to square this. I got to make sure this thing's all done squared up. I got to take this thing and make sure the head goes to center, is dead center of the turntable board beneath it. I got to configure it so that it knows exactly how far to go down. And one of the guys had an issue with that, and it slammed the hot print head right into his acrylic board and shattered it. And then, when he sanded it down where it divoted and it melted it, he cleaned the acrylic with some rubbing alcohol to make sure he got all the little dirt pieces out of all that.
Oh, dear.
Which caused it to spider crack. And now he's like kind of taping it and hoping it doesn't fuck up. But at some point we're supposed to get a heated build platform to go underneath it, and it's like, you know what happens to a crack that it gets heated and cooled and heated and cooled?
It just gets worse and worse and worse.
I'm fucking over acrylic. I'm done with acrylic. Like, I don't want to... There are other surfaces and platforms. This is a very ingenious and clever design.
In theory.
And I don't have the time to sit and tweak it. I mean, collectively, I think these guys have put in like 60 hours together that have been continually working on it, where I've kind of gotten mine but haven't worked on it.
Just with you, or with...
No, on their own, trying to get it configured to working to print, and they still don't have it printing. So, I'm like, I don't have 60 hours. I don't have 20 hours, you know? Not doing all the podcasting right now because I don't have the time, so... I kind of want to get it up so I can print parts and make shit. That's what I want.
And I've been looking at Hawkster. He used to do Apple Geeks, little webcomic that I used to read, which is on permanent hiatus, looks like. And he printed out on his little 3D printer Tony Stark's little thing with LED light things, and it's like three...
Yeah, that's what I've been thinking.
Like five different pieces. It's cool.
What's Revue?
Sorry.
I've been thinking that I want to spend time on this to do like a cosplay get up to where, you know, I wire up an actual working Daft Punk helmet, or, yes, I've been thinking like Iron Man. I've actually been thinking about how you could print the individual parts to make like the glove so that it would flex and that the parts would snap into each other. Like, I have kind of ideas. Like, that's what I want to start, you know, doing with this stuff. But until I have a printer, it's all like...
For naught,
yeah. So, I'm going to give it a good try, though, tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going down to TechCo all day. Something we've had on the calendar for months. Eric and I have, like, just me and him all day at the TechCo. We're going to, like, watch all the Aliens movies while screwing with the 3D printer and just see what we get done. But, man, looking at, like, alternatives, I think I've already, like, sold myself. And then, like, at the same time, like, every time I look at the alternatives and considering it, I look back and it's, like, somebody else is posting of, like, another issue they have or a problem, and I was like, oh, fuck. Why don't I just... $70. Like, don't look at the sunk cost. Don't look at the $1,000 invested in this gloriously architected-looking machine.
Just look at it, that
Look
you've
at the
got
$70
90%,
printer,
95% of a printer, and
Yeah.
you just need that last 5%.